So in the most recent update of Anime Last Stand, we got a complete rework to every godly unit. And some people are pretty mad about this, but I personally think it is a very good change if you know how to use it. So today we'll be talking about the best ways to use every godly unit, and also the best godlies in general. I hope you enjoy the video. If you do, maybe leave a like or subscribe. But anyways, let's get into it. Okay, before we actually get into the video, have we seen what they're planning for this weekend? Why? Blue Lock? Anyways, I'm just going to forget about the Blue Lock update. Surely it's an April Fool's prank or something. But a couple people have been asking me about a tier list for the new godly reworks, and I think if I had to make one, it would look like this. So, we have Garou in lead, Sukuna in lead DPS, Luffy in lead DPS. You guys can read, right? You know what this all means. I don't think the tiers necessarily mean like a unit is better than another. I wouldn't really rank them in terms of like who's better, because they are all kind of usable in different ways, and we'll talk about that later in this video. But if I had to choose one to be the best godly right now, Hero Hunter Cosmic. This guy is very OP, and the funny thing about that is they didn't even really change anything about him. They just gave him a new godly lead. So if you look right here, every 5th attack increased crit damage and crit chance of all units in range by 50% for 15 seconds. Now this is probably the most broken buff ever in the history of this game, because if we look at his SPA here, 3.05 SPA, which means 5 attacks from him is 15.25 seconds roughly, or just over the 15-second cooldown. And if we saw this in action here, so my Garou has his 3.05 SPA on placement, 2.5k to place by the way. Take a look at my Kurumi. 95% crit chance with his buff. That buff will run out when enemies aren't spawning in, but as soon as he starts attacking again, 95% crit chance once more. And it almost has 100% uptime, especially in late waves when nothing is really dying, so each is always attacking. You pretty much have a permanent 50% buff to your crit chance and crit damage, which is just crazy. Exactly how crazy of a buff we're going to try and find out, but keep in mind with Garou, you can actually get him to upgrade 3 before his SPA even changes, so that means you can get to mode swap and change him to cosmic mode, where his damage isn't even bad because he steals from the people next to him, and he does it in full AoE damage because he has Cosmic Dust Storm. So he's doing really good damage right now every so often, and he's also 3.05 SPA to keep the buff going on everyone around him. So if you look at my Kurumi here, she's going up to 72.5% crit chance. My Tatsumaki's already at 104. Don't get me wrong, okay, I do think the godly rework was good, personally, but this definitely needs to change. I think Garou's lead is the only really broken thing right now. Really OP, needs to get reworked again. Because, especially when you think about Usopp, for example, we had a unit whose entire gimmick was 100% crit, and if you take a look at my Tatsumaki, she has 100% crit now, and there's no reason to run Usopp at all. If you look at my Saitama, we actually see that. He's got 96%, doing 1 billion damage full AoE. Like, there's no point to run Usopp at all, and this buff is really dumb. If you look at the damage numbers on this, actually, see if we can catch my my Saitama doing damage here. Maybe he does it all in multiple ticks, I'm not sure, but just look at how fast we're melting a boss with 600 billion health. We're using no abilities right now. I think you get the point with Garou and call that run at wave 105. But another thing is, look at the rewards on Infinites now. I got a Pearl, I got a Perfect Cube, I got Technique Shards. All I did was sit in an Infinite. These are really good to AFK farm. You get a bunch of XP food too. It's gonna help me a lot with showcase videos. But yeah, Infinites are what you want to farm right now. And Garou's really broken. I still can't believe we're getting a Blue Lock update, man. Like, where does that come from? Should have been a Halloween update. I'm getting nightmares thinking about this. But I did mention earlier that every godly unit is good at their own thing. So what are those things? Let's talk about how to use every godly. When should you use them? How do you use them? All that good stuff. Starting with the first godly ever, Pride the One. This guy's godly lead can be pretty good right now because we do have some good burn units in the meta. So Genos is really good right now, his damage is just really high. And then Sanji is also pretty good for full AoE damage and has a buff to burn. So if you pair all those together, I do have a picture that I made for all the different godly teams to run. I think that Pride can be very strong. I have the strengths and weaknesses in the bottom right, bottom left, so you can see that. Sorry for the picture being kind of ugly. But that's how I'd recommend using Pride right now, and he can be very strong for certain content. The True Curse King Sukuna. This guy, I think, is another very strong godly. He just kind of has everything. Very good damage, very good abilities, very good passives, and he does have a pretty strong lead as well if you know how to use it. So if you plan to run him as your godly lead, I'd recommend following my guide picture here, or his best teammates, people who actually get value out of his buff. Dio, you probably noticed, is just a support in most of these teams. He's a very good support with his accelerate and his passives and his time stops and everything, but his godly lead isn't the best and I wouldn't recommend using him because there are better options for a lead, but his support is very good in some comps, one example being Ichigo. Ichigo is probably the worst godly after this rework. He can still be okay, but he needs to have the right team, he's very demanding, so I'd recommend if you want to use him, you follow my guide to choose his teammates because he needs them to trigger his passives to increase his damage. Otherwise, he's very mid, even his godly buff is very bad. If you know what you're doing, you don't really care about elemental disadvantage. Jin Mori, I think, is strictly going to be a damage dealer because his godly buff is very bad, but his damage can be okay. It's very reliant on his clone, so you want to run him in a team with Sung Jinwoo as a leader, because Sung Jinwoo buffs clone damage, and Jin Mori can be okay with the right team. Goku, I think, is a pretty good support unit. He does have some good passives and abilities. If you want to run him as a leader, you can do it in a boss damage team, so you can kind of just focus doing a bunch of damage to bosses. Very good for game modes like Titan Rush. The Shadow Monarch, Sung Jinwoo. Not much really changed about this guy, he still is pretty good for progressive, but if you want to run him as your lead, I would recommend using him in Jin Mori teams like we talked about. Otherwise, I'd say use him in your second slot on a team with Garou as the lead, and maybe even Luffy. Luffy has some pretty good damage and passives and abilities. He's a very solid unit, and his godly buff actually is very good. He's kind of like the replacement to Hero Hunter if you don't have him. His godly buff applies to a lot of units. Finally, Cosmic Garou, or Hero Hunter. The entire beginning of the video was about this guy, so you should know what he does. But he has a very strong godly lead, strong enough to make him the best godly in my opinion, maybe even the best unit right now. And he does also have some very strong passives and damage and abilities. If you want to see my little godly team pictures again, here's the one for Pride. This is strong for nature content, but pretty bad in immunity or water content. Here's the one for Sukuna, pretty good for late game content, but can kind of struggle in the early waves. Of course, Dio is the support in most of these teams. Here's the team for Ichigo, and you need to build your team completely around him for him to do good damage. He can be good for all content, but it is kind of expensive. There are a couple good teams for Goku. If you're going to try and kill bosses for like Titan Rush or something, he can be good as the leader. If you're going to use him just for high damage, you can also use him in a team with Garou, but most of their team is going to be water, so you need to be careful of nature. Wukong or Jin Mori can still be a pretty good DPS unit, but I think most of the time there are better options. And then for Sung Jinwoo, Luffy, and Garou, their best teams are going to be the overall ones, but I do think there are two good variations, and Garou is going to be the best. Well, I think that's all we got for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed or at least found something helpful. Remember, we do have the Blue Lock update coming, and I'm kind of excited for it just because it's such a bad idea that, like, it should at least be funny, even if the update sucks. But anyways, thank you to my channel members for making this video possible. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope to see you in the next one, and have a great day.